On September 3rd, 1935, a young vagrant was wandering through Kingsbury Run, a prehistoric riverbed located in Cleveland. This Hooverville area of Depression era Cleveland bordered the Roaring Third, or Third Precinct section of the city known for its bars, brothels, flop houses, and gambling dens. The young man was waiting to hop on a freight train scheduled to come through in a couple minutes when he noticed something gruesome even for this area, and these times at the base of this hill. A mound of dirt shaped like a human body revealed that it was, in fact, a makeshift grave. It held the body of a man. He would be identified as Edward Andrassy after his head was discovered in a separate burial plot near his body. Andrassy had worked as a psychiatric orderly in Cleveland Hospital, but at the time of his death, he was unemployed with no viable means of supporting himself. Like so much of the country in 1934, he was decapitated and emasculated. The coroner believes the decapitation to be the cause of death. This is the first of a dozen victims that will be attributed to the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. We will discuss the rest of the victims right after my overly obnoxious trigger warning. Roll the intro. While the authorities were searching the area around Anders's body for clues, they discovered a second body in the weeds. This one had also been decapitated, but the head was never recovered. It appeared as if the body had been saturated with oil and set afire posthumously, causing the skin to turn red and leathery. Authorities believe this body to have been here longer than the couple of days it appears Andrassy's body lie interred here. On January 26, 1936, a woman's dismembered body is discovered in several half-bushel baskets wrapped in butcher's paper and drained of blood. The baskets were scattered between 2315 and 2325 East 20th Street, also in the Roaring Third. Her head was never recovered, making a definite cause of death impossible to determine. She was identified as 44-year-old Florence Genevieve Polillo by her fingerprints. A vagrant was looking to hop a freight train on either the New York Central or the adjacent Nickel Plate Road tracks when he discovered the torso of a man near an old freight shed by the Nickel Plate Road police barracks. Even though his head was located a couple days later near the Shaker Heights Rapid Transit tracks, he was never identified. He became known as the Tattooed Man due to the 6 tattoos that adorned his body, something very unusual for 1936. A railroad worker stated that the head was not there at 3 p.m. A late model Cadillac was seen in the vicinity around 11 p.m. It is believed the man was decapitated while still alive. No drugs or alcohol were found in the man's system, and nothing suggested he had been bound before being dismembered. There's a town named Brooklyn right by Cleveland. On July 22, 1936, the severely decomposed, decapitated body of a white man was found near the Big Creek area of Brooklyn. A thorough search of the area turned up a skeletonized head belonging to the same man. A large amount of blood contaminating the ground under the skull led police to believe the man had been murdered on the spot. The advanced state of decomposition prevented identification of the only known West Side victim. The man's cheap clothing, long hair, and proximity to a homeless camp led most to believe he was a vagrant who lived in the camp. By this point, Elliot Ness of Untouchables fame was personally involved in the case. During the 1920s, Chicago had garnered a reputation for police corruption, largely due to Al Capone. Capone is infamous in Prohibition-era organized crime. Notably, he is rumored to have had people inside the police station who knew everything that was going on there. There is one story where a journalist complained to the police chief about being frisked in violation of freedom of the press, and the chief informing the reporter that those weren't cops, they were Capone's men. In October of 1931, Capone's reign of terror had come to an end with his conviction and 11-year sentence for tax evasion. Before that, Cleveland had instituted the Office of Public Safety Director, providing oversight to the police and fire department. During the time that the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run was active, Elliot Ness held that office. Ness made public statements about catching the murderer. The murderer responded by taunting Ness with postcards providing clues and telling Ness that he still couldn't catch the killer. Some bodies were even left in plain view of Ness's office. Ness contributed to the arrest and interrogation of Dr. Francis Sweeney, who we will discuss later. Ness personally conducted raids into some of the Hoovervilles looking for suspects. When he didn't find any, he ordered the shanty towns burned down to protect the residents by forcing them to leave the area. Days after the burnings, Ness dispatched 6 two-man search teams to a large area of Cleveland, ostensibly to conduct fire inspections. Really, they were looking for leads in this case. They did not find any. They did find hundreds of families living in squalid conditions among various and sundry fire code violations. Social reformers became aware of the conditions and started cleaning the area up, even if the police could not. The taunting postcards continued until the 1950s, but victims kept turning up back in 1936. An unhoused man was sitting near a stagnant pool of water looking to hop a freight train when he noticed something floating in the water. It turned out to be a man's torso that was severed between the 3rd and 4th cervical vertebrae, which is around the middle of the neck, as well as the 3rd and 4th lumbar vertebrae, near the top of the hips. While searching for the rest of the body, police found a dirty felt hat labeled Lottie's Smart Shop, Bellevue, Ohio, and a blue work shirt wrapped in newspaper. Both were covered with blood. Neither helped authorities identify the man. The coroner listed the probable cause of death as decapitation. In the 1930s, Euclid Beach was a popular amusement park. It wasn't open on February 23, 1937, when part of a woman's body washed up on the beach near 156th Street. The legs, arms, and head were never found. In May, the lower half of the woman's torso washed up around East 30th Street. The arms had been disarticulated at the shoulder. The neck was disarticulated between the 7th cervical and 1st thoracic vertebrae, which is the base of the neck just above the shoulders. The coroner was not able to discern a probable cause of death or the woman's identity. On June 6, 1937, a rotting burlap bag was found under the Lorraine Carnegie Bridge, which contained the skeletal remains of a dismembered and decapitated woman who was missing a rib. A newspaper from June of 1936 was in the bag with her. Police believed these were the remains of Rose Wallace, who disappeared from the same bar as Polillo the previous August. Officially, the remains are unidentified, making her Jane Doe number 2. Another burlap bag, this one from chicken feed, was observed floating in the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland Flats on July 7th. The bag contained a man's bisected torso and disarticulated thighs. The head and internal organs, including the heart, were never found. The man was never identified, making him John Doe 5. Almost a year later, on April 8, 1938, a woman's leg was found in the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland Flats. On May 2nd, 2 burlap bags were floating west of the 3rd Street Bridge. The bags contained a woman's nude bisected torso, thighs, and feet. Her arms and head were never found. She is the only victim to have in her system. The final 2 victims were found on August 16, 1938. Men picking for metal to recycle at a dump at the end of East 9th Street in Columbus found the remains of a woman wrapped in rags, brown paper, and cardboard. Her head and hands were found with the body. The dismemberment was similar to the other victims. She stayed unidentified, becoming Jane Doe 4. Nearby on the Chicago lakefront, in plain view of Ness's office, a man's completely disarticulated body was found. He remains unidentified and is referred to as John Doe 6. Now that we know all the victims, let's talk about the major suspects. Police interrogated over 9,000 suspects, but only 3 were considered serious suspects. The first was Frank Dolezal, a Cleveland resident who had lived with Polillo previously. He also had connections to the other identified victims. Dolezal confessed to Polillo's murder. However, he hung himself while in custody at the Cuyahoga County Jail before he could be brought to trial. Another serious suspect was World War I veteran Dr. Francis Edward or Frank Sweeney. During the war, Sweeney performed field amputations and suffered nerve damage from a gas attack. In 1934, Sweeney separated from his wife, who could no longer take his alcoholic binges, which resulted from pathological anxiety and depression due to his wartime experiences. Ness wanted to interview Sweeney personally, but he was so intoxicated he had to sober up in a hotel room for 3 days first. 2 polygraph tests were administered, and Sweeney failed them both. The polygraph technician said that Sweeney was the perpetrator, with Sweeney being the cousin of the U.S. Congressman Martin L. Sweeney, who publicly roasted Ness over not being able to solve the murders, and all the evidence being extremely circumstantial. Ness did not believe he could get a conviction against Sweeney. Sweeney committed himself to an insane asylum where he resided for the rest of his life. He also spent the rest of his life taunting Ness with postcards about the case and Ness's inability to convict him. The final serious suspect was Willie Johnson. In June of 1942, Johnson was witnessed disposing of a trunk that contained the torso of 19-year-old Margaret Frances Wilson. Her disarticulated head and arms were found in nearby bushes. Her legs were found in Johnson's home. Even though rumors of connections to the identified victims of the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run existed, Johnson could not be linked to the crimes. Johnson was tried, convicted, and executed for Wilson's murder. In 2024, the DNA Doe Project got involved to help identify some of the unidentified victims. Let's wrap this up, shall we? In today's world of advanced identification techniques, it's almost impossible to imagine a serial killer that leaves 10 victims that go unidentified. In today's world of pervasive video surveillance, it is impossible to imagine someone being able to murder and or dump 12 bodies without being caught on camera at least once. 90 years ago, this simply wasn't the case. Forensic science was in its infancy and video surveillance did not exist at all. In the 1930s, the only means of identification for bodies were dental records, fingerprints, and possibly a loved one identifying the person based on identifying marks and tattoos. Back then, without an eyewitness to the crime or some portion of the crime or a confession, most murders went unsolved. We think the world is getting worse. We think more people are getting murdered. We think that more children are abducted. All of that is false. There is less violent crime today than there was in the past. We are just more aware of it because of advances in communication. Until less than 30 years ago, it would not have been possible for me to make this video without leaving my house. But today, that is exactly what I did. I looked up the case on the internet, wrote the script, filmed it with the camera connected to my laptop, and uploaded it to the internet, all without leaving my house. In 1994, I would not have been able to do that. So here's my question. Are all of these advancements in technology, which leave us feeling like the world is going to hell in a handbasket, a good thing? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. A membership and or super thanks would be awesome too. And now, I got a jam, so tag, you're it.